If you've ever wondered whether police can get inside your house while you're away, stay with me because by the end of this video, you'll know the exact tactics officers commonly rely on, the legal loopholes they often point to, and most importantly, what you can do right now to protect your home and your privacy before it ever becomes an issue. Picture this for a moment. You finally take that long-awaited trip. Everything seems perfectly normal. Days later, you return home expecting everything to be exactly as you left it. Instead, you pull into your driveway and immediately know something is wrong. The front door is shattered. Furniture has been moved. Closets have been opened. Personal belongings are scattered throughout the house. The reason? Police officers decided they had a justification to force their way inside while you were gone. What makes situations like this even more frustrating is that many times the explanation sounds unbelievable. Maybe officers claim they thought someone inside was in danger. Maybe they say they smelled something unusual. Maybe they insist they had reason to believe a crime was taking place. Whether those reasons ultimately hold up or not, the damage is already done. Your privacy has already been invaded, and your home has already been searched. Over the years, countless homeowners have found themselves in situations where officers used one explanation or another to enter a property without the owner being present. Again and again, the same patterns emerge. The justification sounds convincing at first glance, but once you slow down and examine the details, the story starts to fall apart. Unfortunately, by the time those questions get asked, the officers have already entered. The first tactic revolves around emergencies. This is one of the most frequently used methods because it sounds reasonable on the surface. Officers rarely arrive and announce that they simply want to search your house. Instead, they'll frame the situation differently. They'll say they're concerned about someone's safety. They'll claim they heard something unusual. They'll mention a strange odor. Sometimes they'll say they're performing a welfare check and just want to make sure everyone is okay. The important thing to understand is that officers generally don't have to prove an emergency actually existed in that exact moment. What often matters is whether a reasonable officer could have believed an emergency existed based on the circumstances they observed. Those are two very different concepts. One requires proving the emergency was real. The other focuses on whether the belief appeared reasonable at the time. This distinction becomes incredibly important when discussing the legal principle known as exigent circumstances. Under this doctrine, police can sometimes enter a home without first obtaining a warrant if they reasonably believe immediate action is necessary because of an emergency. However, there is a limitation that often gets overlooked. Officers are not supposed to manufacture the emergency themselves and then use that manufactured emergency as the reason for entry. A situation shared by one homeowner illustrates why this issue matters so much. According to her account, an officer arrived at the residence for an unrelated purpose involving a notification. There had been no emergency calls from the property, no reports of violence, no reports of injuries, nothing suggesting an urgent crisis inside the home. While approaching the residence, the officer reportedly noticed an odor and concluded it could indicate a decomposing body inside. The problem was that the smell was allegedly coming from garbage located outside near a neighboring property. Nevertheless, the odor became the basis for escalating the situation. Here's where timing becomes critical. The homeowner later explained that officers spent a substantial amount of time around the property before ultimately forcing entry. They looked around, checked windows, and observed the home for an extended period. That raises an obvious question. If officers genuinely believed a life-threatening emergency existed inside, why wait so long before entering? If someone is truly in immediate danger, every minute matters. Delays become difficult to reconcile with claims of urgency. The timeline itself can sometimes reveal whether officers were responding to an actual emergency or searching for justification to enter. The challenge, of course, is that if you're away from home, you're not present to challenge assumptions in real time. You're not there to point out that the odor is coming from somewhere else. You're not there to explain what officers are observing. You're not there to question their conclusions. That's why documentation becomes so important. One of the strongest tools available to homeowners is a reliable camera system that records locally. Having cameras that store footage directly to your own system creates an independent record of events. Timestamps can show exactly when officers arrived, how long they remained outside, what actions they took before entering, and whether their behavior matched the emergency they later described. If officers eventually force entry and significant questions arise regarding the legality of their actions, that footage can become incredibly valuable. Instead of relying solely on conflicting accounts, you have an objective record showing what happened and when it happened. But even if you eliminate the emergency excuse, there is another tactic that catches many people off guard. This one involves consent. Most homeowners assume that only they can authorize officers to enter their property. Unfortunately, the law is often more complicated than that. In many situations, police don't necessarily need permission from the homeowner specifically. They may only need permission from someone they reasonably believe has authority to grant access. This creates opportunities for confusion. Under legal standards involving apparent authority, officers may rely on consent from a person they reasonably believe has the authority to allow entry, even if that individual later turns out not to have had the legal right to provide permission. Think about how broad that category can become. Roommates may qualify, spouses may qualify, partners may qualify, adult children living at home may qualify. Depending on the circumstances, even someone who spends significant time at the property could become part of the discussion. The practical reality is that officers often don't frame the interaction as a formal request for consent. Instead, it sounds casual. They may ask if they can step inside for a moment. They may say they're just trying to clarify something. They may suggest it will only take a few seconds. To the person answering the door, it can sound harmless. They may feel uncomfortable saying no. They may want to be polite. They may think cooperation is the easiest path. A casual response can quickly become the consent officers we're seeking. Any of those individuals might unknowingly provide access that leads to officers entering the residence. There is, however, an important limitation. When multiple people possess authority over a residence and one person expressly refuses consent while present, that objection can carry significant legal weight. In situations where one resident says yes, but another resident who is physically present says no, the refusal can override the consent. The problem is obvious. That protection depends on someone being there to object. If you're traveling and another occupant allows officers inside, your ability to invoke that protection disappears because you're not physically present. For that reason, communication becomes essential. Anyone with access to your home should understand your expectations ahead of time. Family members, roommates, trusted friends, and anyone holding a key should know exactly how to respond if officers arrive unexpectedly. The message should be straightforward. They should understand that they are not authorized to provide consent on your behalf. If officers request entry, they should direct officers to contact the homeowner rather than granting access themselves. Clear communication beforehand can prevent serious problems later. Now let's move to another situation that surprises people: warrants. Many individuals assume that once a warrant exists, every action taken by law enforcement is automatically proper. That's not necessarily true. A warrant is not unlimited authority. It is authorization that comes with boundaries. The warrant should identify where officers may search and what they are looking for. Those details matter because they define the scope of the search. If officers receive authorization to search a specific area for specific evidence, that does not automatically give them unrestricted access to every location inside the property. The warrant creates limits. The issue arises when nobody is present to monitor compliance with those limits. Consider situations where officers execute a warrant while the homeowner is out of town. The homeowner has no ability to observe where officers search. They cannot verify whether officers remain within the authorized areas. They cannot immediately question actions that appear inconsistent with the warrant. This is one reason surveillance systems can become so important. In a well-known incident involving a musician whose home was searched while he was away, cameras throughout the property recorded the execution of the warrant. Because the footage existed, the public could see what occurred rather than relying entirely on official reports. Without independent recordings, disputes often become difficult to resolve. One side tells its version of events, the other side tells a different version. Objective footage can dramatically change that equation, but perhaps the most overlooked tactic involves arrest warrants. Many homeowners believe that if officers are not looking for them personally, they have nothing to worry about. Unfortunately, that assumption can create problems. Police may arrive at a residence looking for someone else entirely. Maybe that individual once lived at the address. Maybe someone reported seeing them nearby. Maybe a tip suggested they could be inside. When officers arrive carrying an arrest warrant for another person, homeowners sometimes assume that warrant automatically authorizes a search of the property. That is not necessarily the case. The existence of an arrest warrant does not automatically grant authority to search every residence where officers suspect the person might be located. Additional legal requirements often apply when the residence belongs to someone else. In practice, however, confusion frequently benefits law enforcement. Officers may state that they have a warrant and leave homeowners with the impression that entry is inevitable. Many people never stop to ask what type of warrant is being presented. Understanding that distinction can be incredibly important. If officers are looking for another individual and seek entry into your residence, knowing whether they possess an arrest warrant or a search warrant can significantly affect your rights. The key is remaining calm, understanding the difference, and making clear that you do not consent to entry or a search absent proper legal authority. And finally, if officers ever arrive while you are home and attempt to enter without a warrant, remember that you do not have to voluntarily surrender your rights. You can clearly state that you do not consent to searches or entry. If officers claim to have a warrant, request to see it. Maintain your rights and avoid creating unnecessary opportunities for misunderstandings. At the end of the day, every one of these situations comes down to preparation. Officers often count on confusion, uncertainty, or the absence of the homeowner. The more informed you are, the harder it becomes for anyone to take advantage of those circumstances. Your home is one of the most protected places under the law, but protecting those rights starts with understanding exactly how these tactics work before they ever show up at your front door.